Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. We're very excited to present another Tridium talk. And this one's going to be centered more on a feature that is an integral part of our most latest release, Niagara 4.9, and that's single sign-on with Niagara as an identity provider. So today on the call with me, I will have the fantastically talented Melanie Coggan, who was one of the lead architects and engineers who designed this fantastic initiative that we are very grateful to be able to present to you today. But before we get started, just to let everyone know, this presentation will be recorded and it will be available on TridiumTalk.com under the resources tab. I will cover that in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation. And then in addition to that, we're going to have an opportunity for you to posit questions, and we will certainly do our best to answer as many of those as possible at the end of the demonstration. And any items that we are not able to get to, we will certainly pick up offline and then post that along with this training video on our website. So without any further ado, let's get into 4.9 because we want to ensure we can use this opportunity to cover some of the new critical features that were introduced in Niagara 4.9. So one thing that we're always endeavoring to do with every release is to ensure that we are always focusing on and improving some of the key tenets of our visualization, rapid deployment, security, edge, connectivity, certification, and IT compliance. And as such, we like to kind of position our features so that they're always making at least incremental improvements with regards to each. So under the visualization aspect of Tenant, we introduced tag-based graphics. We have a Tridium talk that's available on that if you're interested to see that. And what that offers is just an incredible workflow enhancement for our SIs or whomever is creating graphics in their Niagara stations. Also, it gives you the opportunity to base your graphics visualizations entirely on tags, so certainly a fantastic feature. In addition to that, we brought in the video framework. So traditionally, you needed an applet to view any of your video feeds when they were integrated with your Niagara station. Now you can stream them directly from your station, no plugins required, and you can get that HTML5 streaming, which is certainly a very important aspect to a building management system and to ensure that you're able to stay on top of the security and really the vitality of your building systems and its occupants. On the deployment aspect, we have multiple edge tool updates that we released in 4.9. If you notice, we've been slowly but surely adding multiple provisioning steps within our provisioning job service. And we've been really trying to focus on providing some provisioning steps related to edge tools, as that certainly improves the workflow of seamlessly getting any type of configuration changes, application templates quickly out to edge devices so you can get the job done quickly. In addition to that, we introduced ACE for Portable Niagara, and ACE is our deterministic runtime engine, and that's going to be available for some of our portability customers, which is certainly going to provide them the unique advantage to take advantage of that runtime and the quick startup time that the ACE engine provides. And along the same lines of that, we now have support for multiple IORs with the Edge 10. So that kind of changes the paradigm for the Edge 10 because it kind of positions it now as you can really do anything with it because you have really as many IO as you need to control larger equipment or systems such as like a central plant, for example. Now in the security aspect, and what we'll be covering today is the SAML internal IDP or single sign-on with Niagara as an identity provider. So we'll be getting into that a little bit further. And we're always, with every release, ensuring that we are staying on top of any security items that really need to be implemented to address any potential vulnerabilities or really just to ensure the ongoing vitality of the core framework. So that's something that's foremost on our mind, and we always ensure our customers that when it comes to security, you've got the right partner in Niagara, and we will ensure that we continue along those lines. On the connectivity tenant, we introduced MQTT authentication along with the JSON toolkit. And where that's going to be particularly useful is for our customers who develop mobile applications and they want to bring that data into the Niagara, they want to bring that data from the Niagara framework or from the Niagara stations into a mobile application. That's certainly going to be a useful feature for them. And then on the certification and compliance side, we're always expanding our support for database operating systems and browsers, and we will continue to do as such as we release further prospective versions of Niagara. So without any further ado, let's get into single sign-on and why you'd like to use that in your station. So first and foremost, I mean, you're going to save valuable time and resources across your organization, and that's critical, especially considering that by implementing this feature, you'll also be improving the security posture of your Niagara infrastructure. And more specifically, it's because you have that opportunity to now centralize user credentials and management in one location, which greatly reduces the chance of user profiles or any user parameters getting out of sync, for example. Also, too, for example, let's say that in a station you had let's say an employee that was there that's no longer with the company. This really just allows you to kind of seamlessly handle such an event because you've got it in one place. You don't have to adjust or you don't have to delete users in multiple stations. You've got it all in one. So this feature really goes a long way in kind of improving that management infrastructure. And then also too, you can really reduce your reliance on IT support infrastructure when you're accessing your Niagara stations via browser, because you don't have to really to deal with, let's say, their IDP, for example. You don't have to jump through any hoops, really access any documentation or anything like that to understand how to set up your station to support your organization's IDP or external IDP, because it's all within the Niagara station. So it provides our users with an ability to kind of understand the manner in which this has been set up and allow them to manage the various pieces and components without having to bring in your IT support infrastructure, which will certainly improve your efficiency, because you won't have to, I don't have to call IT. I don't have to wait for them to get back with me. I can get to it and I can implement it. And then that goes along the same lines, is that, if you're going to be managing an external IDP, you're going to need to upkeep it. And there's going to be a good amount of effort associated with that. And now, since it's just all through Niagara, you have that just single user interface where you can access everything you need, make critical configuration changes if required, and just get the job done quicker. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, and getting to your Niagara stations in a more timely manner so that you can do what you need to do. In addition to that, it improves the user navigation experience across your Niagara infrastructure. The reason why that's important is because, again, let's use that enterprise use case. I have a supervisor and I've got multiple buildings that are connected to it. Now I can just access the supervisor and say I need to go to 3 different buildings. I don't have to re-enter credentials. I don't have to re-enter my password. I can just seamlessly go from station to station. And that's a serious workflow improvement. Let's say if there's a critical alarm that I really need to address in one of those buildings. Now I don't have to enter my login, I have to enter my password. Let's say that you forgot your password. And I'm not saying that would happen frequently, but if it did, again, we're removing these roadblocks through the single sign-on. And addition to that, this mitigates risk for access to third-party systems, because you're ensuring that all your authentication, the critical information, is housed in one location. And then more than that, just kind of along the same lines, it eliminates password fatigue. It reduces the time re-entering passwords for the same identity. And let's say, for example, that you had a different password in another station. That happens from time to time. But now with this, again, you don't have to deal with that, because all of your user information, that critical authentication parameter, is in one centralized location. So just saves you time, saves you the headache, and really just helps you get the job done quicker. So Next thing I'd like to do is talk about how you use single sign-on, because that's kind of an important piece. So what I wanted to do here today is present a video, and I will provide the use case at the beginning of this video. And after we move through that, we'll kind of jump into the question and answer session, but this will give you a kind of a quick overview of how to set up single sign-on in your Niagara stations.
Let's say that we have a supervisor station serving a campus of buildings, and we want to access the Niagara station serving its auxiliary or support facilities without having to re-authenticate. For this example, we will be starting from the security dashboard, which was introduced in Niagara 4.8 and provides a bird's eye view of a station's security configuration. As you can see, there are multiple security alerts shown for each station which need to be addressed as soon as possible. Since I can hyperlink to each station's login page directly from the security dashboard system view, I'll simply click on the station name, and as expected, I am prompted with the standard Niagara login. Now, if I desired to bypass this additional authentication prior to Niagara 4.9, then I would have to either manually pre-configure an IDP, along with several station parameters, or re-enter my credentials to connect to each station. This can take up valuable time when attempting to perform critical configuration changes within your connected stations. Even more, it places an unnecessary reliance and resource load upon your IT support infrastructure to assist with troubleshooting when encountering any authentication issues. But now in Niagara 4.9, by using single sign-on with Niagara as the IDP, you can seamlessly access multiple stations without additional re-authentication, while saving valuable time and improving your station's security posture in the process. Now, let's get back to the demonstration. First, let's begin by installing the SAML modules in my connected stations. I'll start by opening a secure platform connection to my stations and access the software manager. Next, I'll search the table until I locate the SAML RT, UX, WB, and SAML encryption modules. Then, I'll click on each module until all are highlighted. Select Install, and then click Commit. To keep things moving, I have already added these modules in my other connected stations. Now let's go back to the supervisor station and install the SAML IDP service. We'll start by opening the palette sidebar and search for the SAML module. I'll open the SAML palette, expand the folder named SAML Identity Provider, and drag and drop the SAML IDP service into the services container of my supervisor station. Before we move on with configuring the SAML IDP service, we'll need to generate a server certificate for its use, as well as create user prototypes in each connected station. While remaining in the services container, let's move to the Cert Manager service, which is nested under Platform Services. Open the User Key Store tab, select New, fill out each of the fields in the dialog, and then press OK. As soon as the certificate is generated, we're then ready to create a user prototype for SAML authentication in the user service of each connected station. Let's start by opening a property sheet view of the user service along with the SAML palette and the palette sidebar. I'll drag and drop the user prototype from the SAML palette under User Prototypes in the property sheet, and then name it accordingly. For this demonstration, I will be creating a prototype for a building engineer as well as an administrator. And to keep things moving, I have already added these user prototypes to my other connected stations. Now let's go to the property sheet view of the recently installed SAML IDP service. Next, we'll set the entity ID parameter to conform with the existing syntax shown in the adjacent field. As you can see, the field has been pre-populated to ensure user awareness of the required syntax. While remaining on this view, I'll select the certificate to be used by the SAML IDP service by entering the name of the server certificate we created in the previous step. Then, click Save. Next, let's configure the IDP Circle of Trust. First, I'll open the SAML palette, expand the folder named SAML Identity Provider, drag the Circle of Trust under the Circle of Trust folder, and then name it accordingly. For this demonstration, I'll be creating a circle of trust for building engineers and administrators. Next, I'll click on the Engineer Circle of Trust, and we're presented with the Circle of Trust editor. We'll start off by filling out the description field, as this can provide valuable context for the Circle of Trust. I'll then check the HTTP redirect endpoint to ensure it matches with the previously configured entity ID parameter and the SAML. I'll ensure the Circle of Trust is enabled, select Save, and then move on to adding the other connected stations. As you can see, the stations I've added in my Niagara network automatically show up in the table. To add the stations to the Circle of Trust, simply click the checkbox next to each, or on the checkbox located in the table header, which selects all in the table. To deselect all, simply click again on the checkbox. Since I will be including all the stations in my supervisor station's Niagara network, I will click on the Select All checkbox in the table header and then select Save. As an added enhancement, a filter dialog is located at the top of the table, which provides sorting functionality for any items contained therein. This is particularly useful when sorting through stations with different names or unique character requirements. Additionally, I can add new stations to the Circle of Trust which have not been discovered in the Niagara network of my supervisor station by clicking on the New Station button tab. I can also either edit or delete a new station by first selecting the station and then clicking on Edit Station and Delete Station respectively. Please note, this functionality only applies to new stations that are added to the Circle of Trust, as existing stations will continue to remain in the table until it has been removed from the supervisor's Niagara network. Next, let's add users to the Circle of Trust. As a reminder, matching users do not have to exist in the subordinate stations. Instead, they are created on demand in each station to allow for streamlined configuration changes to the supervisor's SAML IDP service. First, click on the User button tab. As you can see in the table below, the users I've added in the user service of my supervisor station automatically show up. To add these users to the Circle of Trust, simply click the checkbox next to each, or, if needed to select all in the table, on the checkbox located in the table header. Since I'm configuring the Circle of Trust for building engineers, I will select all the users which serve in that capacity and then click Save. While reviewing the Circle of Trust editor, you may have noticed a button tab labeled Auth Schemes. This function allows users to select the authentication schemes associated with the Circle of Trust. The Schemes tab is primarily meant for two purposes. If you're using a remote scheme such as LDAP or Kerberos, and the users don't actually exist yet, or if you want to select all users using a scheme but don't feel like manually checking each entry. Now, since the users in my supervisor station have already been configured to utilize the digest scheme, I will not need to edit any parameters shown herein. If I did need to make configuration changes, however, then I would simply click on the checkbox next to the associated scheme and then select Save. Next, let's add the building engineer prototype we created earlier in the demonstration to the Circle of Trust. As a reminder, ensure that all user prototypes are added to your connected stations prior to configuring the SAML IDP service. Let's start by clicking on the Prototypes button tab. As you can see, the table is empty, so we'll need to manually add each user prototype that applies to the Circle of Trust. Since the Circle of Trust is for building engineers, I'll select the Add icon, enter the name of the user prototype, and click OK. Now, let's add the engineer prototype to each user in the Circle of Trust. First, let's navigate to the user service, open the property sheet view of the user, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and expand SAML COT prototypes. Click on the box next to Engineer and select Save. I'll need to do this for each user in the Circle of Trust before moving on to the next step, but to aid with this demonstration, I have already set this parameter for the other users. The final step in the setup of single sign-on is to configure the remote SAML authentication schemes along with the local SAML IDP service in my connected stations. To accomplish this effort, I will be utilizing Niagara Provisioning in my supervisor station. First, I'll need to install the batch job service in my supervisor station. Let's start with opening the palette sidebar and search for the Provisioning Niagara module. I'll open the palette and drop the batch job service into the services container of my supervisor station. While leaving the palette sidebar open, I'll navigate to the property sheet view of the Niagara network and then drag and drop the provisioning network extension therein. Next, I'll double-click the Provisioning Network EXT to access the Niagara Network Job Builder, and then select the Add button under the steps to run for each station. Select Configure Niagara IDP and SAML Scheme from the list of new job steps and click OK. Next, we'll need to fill out each field in the Configure Niagara IDP and SAML Scheme dialog. As you can see, the Login button text format field has been pre-populated with a B-format string that will display the name of the circle of trust on the connected station's login prompts. If needed, this field can be configured to display any desired text for the station single sign-on login button. Next, we'll need to set the IDP certificate alias, which is the public key that the stations share, to the name of the server certificate previously generated in this exercise. The next field in the dialog, or the SAML signing certificate alias, is the name of the signing certificate used by the subordinate station for single sign-on. But wait, we did not create a signing certificate in my subordinate stations. To aid in such cases, this provisioning job step includes an option to generate a new remote SAML signing certificate in my subordinate stations. Additionally, the SAML signing certificate alias field has also been pre-populated with a default name if we need to generate a new remote SAML signing certificate. Since we need to generate a new remote SAML signing certificate, I'll leave the default name of the SAML signing certificate alias as is and click on the checkbox next to Generate New Remote SAML Signing Certificate. Next, I'll fill out all of the required and valid fields for the signing certificate and select OK. We'll then need to add the subordinate stations to this job step. So I'll then click the Add button located in the stations to include in the job window, select each station, and then click OK. After clicking the Run Now button, the Configure Niagara IDP and SAML Scheme provisioning job step will then run while providing an indication of its status in the right bottom corner of the Workbench window. Upon its completion, a green circle with a check will appear. We're now ready to access my Niagara stations using single sign-on with Niagara as the IDP. I'll log into my supervisor station via the browser and access the Security Dashboard. Now, let's address the multiple station security alerts we observed earlier in the demonstration. I'll simply click on the station name in the dashboard, and as expected, I am prompted with the standard Niagara login. But notice, there is a login button at the bottom of the prompt. This is the same login button we set up during the previous step that allows access to my Niagara stations using single sign-on. Click on the login button, and that's it. I can now access my other Niagara stations to address those security alerts without having to re-authenticate or use an external IDP for this effort.
All right. So again, we are securely navigating our stations and saving time in the process. A really just fantastic feature that breaks down the barriers that previously did exist when trying to utilize an identity provider for single sign-on with your Niagara stations. Now, before we get to the question and answer part of this demonstration, I want to ensure everyone has a chance to visit our updated resources site, as well as Tridium University. And more particular, in Tridium University, we have several feature vignettes for 4.9 and 4.8. And I think we have some more there for 4.6 and for some other products. So if you are interested in learning more about 4.9, learning more about previous versions or any Niagara products in general, the Tridium University is a fantastic resource for that effort. In addition to that, if you are interested in wanting to find more Tridium talk, we have that posted on Tridium.com. If you hit our resources tab and then click on events, you'll be able to find the complete list of Tridium talks available at that prompt. And we've got a great breadth of topics that we covered through these Tridium talks. So it's a fantastic resource if you are trying to get up to speed on the latest and greatest, as well as hearing anything that's particular to end-of-life announcements, such as AX, for example. And I would be remiss if I did not bring up the Niagara Pro Tip series that we have on YouTube. Some of the best and brightest in the organization, James Johnson, Kevin Mamajek, have an ongoing series that they've been uploading to YouTube, which kind of takes a deep dive into analytics and various other kind of pro features that are resident within the framework. And they've got a bunch of recommendations that will help streamline your operations and help you get the job done quicker. Because that's what we're all about. Make sure it gets done right, and so you can get that off the job quicker. So, all right. Now, one thing I did want to cover before we move to the questions is that on that last step when you saw me click on the login with the engineer button to access single sign-on, if I had clicked that remember my choice checkbox down at the bottom of the dialog, I won't ever have to click on that button again. So wanted to highlight that because that's certainly going to be something that you may or may not want to do, but that will provide you a nice workflow enhancement. And then also, in addition to that, in the authentication service under the single sign-on configuration, there is an auto attempt single sign-on flag that you can set to true. And so if you have one single sign-on scheme set up in your station, you can just enable that and you will be able to automatically attempt single sign-on. So a couple different options you could choose from, but I wanted to ensure I highlighted that because that might be something that you may be interested in implementing in your stations. All right. So let's go on to the questions and answers. All right, so first thing we had, the video was fast. Thank you, Pete. And yes, you can view that either through Tridium.com in the resource and events link, or you can go to Tridium University and we will have that content available for you. The Tridium University one is going to go a little bit more in depth than what I provided today, but you'll essentially receive the same demonstration that was provided today. All right. All right. Let's see. All right. Let's see. We have a question, Melanie. If you wanted to jump in here, Elias has asked, will the certificate expire? What happens at that point? And will we have to go in and renew it?
Unlike TLS negotiations where the certificate expiration and the information on the certificate is used, in SAML, we're really just using the private keys as our to provide this kind of authentication. So the certificate may expire. When you create the certificate, you can certainly set it to expire whenever you want, but we don't actually look at the expiration or any of the data in the certificate. And this is because we're actually doing certificate pinning. Their certificate is configured on the client on the IDP and on the station, and they need to match up. And because we're not relying on the whole PKI infrastructure where you have to see is it signed by somebody I trust and everything, those certificates are pinned, and it doesn't matter if they expire or not. So there would be no need to renew them.
Right. Thanks, Melanie. We had another one from Matthew Rubenstein. He wants to know whether there's going to be any support for RSA dongles or other factors than just passwords. He wants to know about multi-factor authentication support. I think you handle the first part about that, and I'll come back on the multi-factor.
Sure. We did have support for RSA dongles back in 3.7, I believe, but we don't support them anymore. Now the SAML, Niagara is an identity provider. The authentication that you're going to be using will be whatever your users configured to use on the supervisor. So if your user on the supervisor is configured to use our multi-factor authentication, the Google authentication, then it will be using multi-factor. If it's configured to use client cert auth, then that's what it'll be using. You can have just username or password. You can be using LDAP. The SAML just integrates with all of these.
All right, great. And insofar, it's multi-factor authentication. That's something that we do not have currently support for at the moment, but that's something that's certainly on the roadmap because we understand that that's will continue to be a need. All right. All right, when linking to a subordinate station, it would be nice not to have the buttons on the login page. Thank you, Hendrik. And if you would like to get around that, what you can do is you can click on Remember My Choice in that checkbox. And then as soon as you do that first login, you won't have to click anything moving forward. And then kind of similarly, if you make that configuration change in authentication service to basically set that flag to true, which will enable auto single sign-on, then you'll be good to go. All right.
It's worth noting that the auto attempt single sign-on is, you can only do that if you only have a single sign-on scheme on your station. So in the case that we had in the video where we had 2 circles of trust, that wouldn't have been possible. However, you can do a lot with just a single circle of trust. And so it would have been possible to configure it to have that set up.
Yep. Thank you, Melanie. All right. Charles McLuhan is asking, can you use this with an LDAP server?
Yes.
Yep.
If you have your supervisor set up to do LDAP, when your customer tries to log into one of the subordinate stations through single sign-on, they're going to be redirected to the supervisor, and then they will be able to log in to the supervisor with their LDAP account and then be redirected back to the station they were actually trying to log into. So, yes.
All right, great. Aaron Lutt asked whether this will work with a Baja UI button value binding hyperlink. I assume perhaps Aaron must be referencing having a hyperlink within a PX page. You hit that hyperlink and it goes to another station, for example. A single sign-on is set up, then you will automatically navigate to that station.
We don't have single sign-on over Fox. So if it is doing a Fox connection, then that would not work, I would assume.
Through HTTPS. Right. All right. Again, the recorded video will be posted on Tridium.com on the resources and events tab. So for anyone that wants to take a look at that after after this wraps up, feel free. We'll have it posted shortly. And let's see. Extend the roadmap to set this up via Fox S. Yes, it certainly is, Pete. We understand we want to continue to drive as much value into this feature as we can. So it's on the roadmap. Thank you very much for that. All right, unless there's anybody have anything else? All right. Well, thank you so much for attending the session today. Again, always feel free to reach out to any of your Niagara partners or reach out directly if you have any questions on features. Use the Tridium community site because that's a great resource if you have a particular question on something you're experiencing within your station, or if you just want a background on additional features or what's next in Niagara. We've got all that there hosted on that site, and I hope everybody has a fantastic day and a great holiday weekend. And thanks again for tuning in.